Hi, I'm Debbie Bacigalupi. Daniel Webster said, "If all my possessions were taken from me, with one exception, I would choose to keep the power of communication, for by it I would soon regain all the rest." What do you think he was talking about? Free speech. And where do we find free speech? In the First Amendment, right? And I declare that if we don't know our 5 liberties in the First Amendment, which one of them is freedom of speech, which one are we losing? We're losing all of them. These conferences are about being educated and then communicating. I guarantee if most of the people out there were educated about the things that we're learning about today, that they would be using their freedom of speech everywhere. Do you agree with me? Yes. But part of the problem is being educated and then practicing what we learn. So we must educate, we must communicate, but we cannot do this. We must not hibernate. My name is Debbie Bacigalupi, and I am the proud daughter of a cattle ranching family in California. In fact, these are my parents' cows, and no, people, that is not methane. Those are simply white clouds. But as the world would have it today, that our cows are causing global warming. And that's how I got involved in this issue, seeing all the things that are happening on my parents' ranch. From water to land use and a whole bunch of other things. In fact, I got my master's writing a thesis about hydroelectric dams. It was called Evidence-Based Management on Hydroelectric Dams. And before that, I was working for Google as a corporate event planner. And as a corporate event planner and in charge of all the speakers coming into Google, including the 2008 presidential candidate who were coming in to speak to Googlers back then, I was in charge of all the presidential candidates who came through, but also the speakers like Jane Fonda and Arnold Schwarzenegger. And there was a theme that I started seeing within Google. This was back in 2007 and 2008. Now, before that, there were already issues going on in Siskiyou County where my parents' ranch is, from water to wolves. And we started to hear about these things and things that would hurt our agricultural industry. But back at Google, there were speakers coming in talking about how cattle are bad for the environment. And as someone who sat and choreographed and was in charge of doing these meetings, I was offended. And I thought, you know what? These people don't know the truth. Because here I am from a 5th, 6th generation cattle ranching family in California. And I know that we are just extraordinary stewards of the land. And for someone who truly believes that people deserve the truth. Because how can you properly plan for the future if you don't understand the truth? And I knew right there with Google, those Googlers, those employees were not being told the truth. And yet they were making life decisions on what these speakers were saying that were false about how bad cattle are for the environment. Look, if cows were as bad as they say they are, do you think we'd be cattle ranching? No. So anyway, it's good to be here. And as I became very active, in fact, after that, I became a certified sommelier. I got my master's, and I was looking towards a really great career, so I thought, but when I started seeing all these things that would attack rural America, I couldn't go back to work. I ran for Congress in 2012 in the Bay Area as an opportunity to educate people on what truly is happening and the attack on rural America, because you know what? Even though you could be liberal and you live in the Bay Area, I guarantee you, you want your clean water, you want your clean air, and you definitely want your food that's provided by rural America. So I got involved. I started researching night and day, and the first couple videos I found, and when I say research, I'd spend all night researching and looking for that smoking gun on things I started seeing around me. And the first 3 videos that I watched, one was Lord Christopher Monckton, and I said, you know what, one day I'm going to meet that man. And then the next one was one by Michael Shaw from California, and we'll watch a little bit of his video tomorrow, I think. And then there was another one on Codex Alimentarius, and someone who loves food and loves healthy food, I started watching videos about the United Nations Codex Alimentarius, international food law, where vitamin C, a small amount of vitamin C, would be prohibited without a medical doctor's prescription. And I was blown away at what I was reading, and I haven't stopped studying and researching, and I haven't stopped using my First Amendment right, my freedom of speech. In fact, in 2014, I dressed up as a pig, a full-on mascot pig, because California was trying to pass, which it did, a proposition, Prop 1, a water bond bill. And if you read this water bond bill, it says right in the bill that fish barriers must be removed. Guys, what's a fish barrier? A dam. So I dressed up as a pig and I flew down to Los Angeles to a meeting, and I flew on Southwest with a big pig head. The rest of the costume was in my luggage. And I can't tell you how many people came up to me asking what sports, where was I going, what farmer's market. And let me tell you, it was a way to talk to and educate people about what was happening with Prop 1, a proposition we would soon be voting on. And have you ever seen people argue with a pig? Well, not only did I do lots of research, but I attended United Nations conferences, the Rio Earth Summit in 2012 when I ran for Congress. And then this was COP21. I went with Alex and Laura Lee and Lord Christopher Monckton and Dr. Willie Soon, who we'll see tomorrow, and Mark Morano, and it was a blast. But I go to these meetings so I could see that the hypocrisy of what these people are doing. At the Rio Earth Summit, and as a corporate event planner, let me tell you, they brought in, sustainable. They're supposed to be all about sustainability, right? And when Alex was talking earlier about them partying, he is not kidding. These people party, and they know how to party, and the wine is flowing, and the champagne is flowing. They have subflooring, they have heating, they have electricity brought in, they have plants and all this decor. And they even use disguises at these conferences. They'll have a full-on metal building and then put wood on the outside and put plants on the outside of that to make it look green. But these people aren't about green. Because if they truly were about saving the planet, don't you think Al Gore would stop flying everywhere around the world? Don't you think he would sell off his mansions? Don't you think that they would start walking the talk? They're not, and they don't plan to. I love this slide because I know that as soon as we leave this conference, you're going to see a FedEx truck somewhere. And why do I bring this up? Because the more we get educated, the more we understand what's happening around us, the more we can never unsee it again, just like the FedEx logo. So what about the FedEx logo do most people not see? The arrow. Who does not see the arrow in the FedEx logo? Be honest. There's a few of you in the room, and once you see it, you can never unsee it. And let that be a symbol for a conference like this. This conference is about educating us so that we can then go out and communicate to others, so that others have the opportunity to choose a future they want for themselves, not a future that is being chosen for us. So, just like the FedEx logo, and I promise a FedEx truck, you'd see one soon, do you see that arrow immediately? So here's your task here going forward. Every time you see a FedEx truck and you can identify that arrow, I challenge you to get on the phone and call someone and forward what we're doing here. It might look like that when you're in the grocery store next, and I do this all the time, And in California, we have to buy our paper bags now. I don't know if you heard that. And so when the grocer asks if I want to buy a paper bag or a plastic bag, I say, no, are you kidding me? Why would I buy a government bag that's a plastic, right? When I'm buying a plastic toothbrush that comes in plastic packaging, and my milk and all of that is plastic, why am I going to buy a government plastic bag? But that's my challenge to you everywhere you go every day, to be an advocate for freedom and liberty and educating people about what's happening around us. Will you take that on? Will you take that on? Thank you. This is the state of the valley. Now, we all know how powerful Silicon Valley is, yes? Lots of money. In fact, it was even mentioned during this presidential election many, many times. We've often heard, as goes California, so goes the nation. So the State of the Valley is a conference that's put on, a luncheon that's put on every year by a group called Joint Venture Silicon Valley. The kinds of people who show up to this conference: Kaiser, Google, Facebook, Wells Fargo, and they even support this. They're donating to these conferences. I went one year, it's $150. But that's what you do when you're in our world. We pay our own way. But who do you think paid for the elected officials, the staff members who showed up to this big meeting and show up every year? Who pays? The taxpayers pay for these people to go to these kind of conferences to find out what the future is like. So this State of the Valley was in 2013. The keynote speaker, and this was sponsored by Kaiser Foundation, is a guy named Paul Sappho. He is what we call a futurist. But I'm just going to let you hear what he has to say about, hopefully, about the future. And maybe just after hearing some of the speakers earlier, things will start to come together in this big puzzle called sustainable development.
Today, California is in fact breaking away from the rest of the United States because of a very profound global shift. Power in this century is devolving away from nation states, and it is moving outwards. It's moving away from capitals to regions and city-states. The real nexus of power in this century is moving from nation states to city-states. The Bay Area is a good example. City-states, both de facto, de jure, legally recognized city-states with seats at the United Nations like Singapore, and also de facto city-states, powerful regions, are the new basic unit of governance in the 21st century. We have a good start with some regional entities, BART, ABAG, but this is where we need to work more. We need to step up to a new leadership position. With that in mind, note that nations don't disappear, and they're not going to disappear in this century replaced by city-states, but now regions and city-states in particular will hold the power. And as I said, we need to think like a region, not a mere collection of cities. We also need to think creatively about resource sharing here in our city-state. We made a good start in police and fire. There are boundary drops happening, fire mergers happening, but we need to have ambitious long-term goals. We need to go a step further and say it's time to start thinking about boundary drops between counties. Why should you only be thinking about mergers between cities in the same county? And of course, we need to merge cities. Look at this map. Why don't we include Santa Cruz as part of the Bay Area? What about San Joaquin Valley? There's a really interesting city-state south of Los Angeles, down the greater San Diego region. And it's an interesting case because the San Diego city-state is not just on the U.S. side of the border. It includes Mexicali, it includes Tijuana. It's an important indicator of what's happening, the shift of power from capitals, from centers to boundaries, from capitals to borders, and the dissolving nature of the nation state. This image is a reminder that in a world where we shift from nation state to city state and power shifts going on, the border simply does not want to exist. And the border fence, in my opinion, is as ineffective and wasteful as any other wall in history. It will go down in history alongside the Great Wall and the Maginot Line. As we go deeper into the day, just reflect on what this means for us. The new order is not about shifting boundaries. It's about dissolving boundaries.
Thank you, Paul Saffo.
So just to go back really quickly, here is what Mr. Paul Saffo is talking about. He said the nexus of power is moving into what we call city-states, mega-cities, mega-regions. This is what a mega-region looks like. In fact, if you visit San Francisco, you will see San Francisco growing, looking more and more like this every single day. This is America2050.org. In America2050.org, which now has been stepped up to the year 2030 under the United Nations 2030 Agenda. In fact, they just had their new Urban Agenda Habitat 3 conference. All of that to support regionalism. What regionalism is high-density living situations where the borders start to disappear. And you could see what Paul Saffo was talking about in Southern California. You see how the Southern California region overlaps into Mexico. If you're going to create a global governance, wouldn't you start to dissolve the boundaries? I'm from the One Bay Area plan. I still live in San Francisco. When I was running for Congress, I was fighting against what is called the One Bay Area Plan, now called Plan 2040. The idea was to take 101 counties, 101 cities, 9 counties, and merge us into one, where we share our resources, whether it's fire department or police or all sorts of things that we're starting to share. So that is exactly what Paul Saffo was talking about, and you've seen this map several times. If you look at this map, this Wildland Project map, which came as a result of a conference that included this document right here, the United Nations Environment Program Global Biodiversity Assessment Report, you could see that the regions where, and Dan mentioned the black regions, look, it's overlapping into Mexico. That America2050.org regional map starts to look just like this without the detail. You heard Paul Saffo say the new order is not about shifting boundaries, it's about dissolving boundaries. You also heard him say, maybe we need to be like Singapore, like with seats at the United Nations table. And he also said that we're moving away from government, which is how we run America. By the way, if government can give it, government can do what? Which makes America very special and unique because our country believed it was to be an experiment of can man rule himself, yes? But these people don't feel that way. That's why they need to get rid of government, and they need to get rid of the sovereignty of nation states and push us into governance and city-states where the nexus of power is more like consensus than something we know, which is a representative government based on we the people. Now, this isn't anything new that you all have been learning today. In fact, back in 1992, one of my Congress people in the Bay Area, Nancy Pelosi, was instrumental in authoring a bill called Agenda 21. And as I go around the country, and as a lot of us do, we get called conspiracy theorists. But I love showing this video because you will see, especially as we talk about Agenda 21, they make Agenda 21 sound like some crazy thing. In fact, Dan brought up Gary Lawrence, who wrote this document called The Future of Local Agenda 21, The New Millennium. And you heard Dan talk about how they needed to change the name of Agenda 21 to something else. Why? Because people like you and me people who believe in gun rights would try and get officials who to vote against Agenda 21 and not implement it locally. So they said, so we'll call our process something else, such as comprehensive planning, growth management, or smart growth. They'll call it something other than Agenda 21. But let's just listen to Nancy Pelosi and what she had to say. By the way, this is a Friday night. It's October 2nd, 1992, hour 2100. I'm not sure if that's a coincidence.
The clerk will report the title of the resolution.
House Concurrent Resolution 353, concurrent resolution expressing the sense of the Congress that the United States should assume a strong leadership role in implementing the decisions made at the Earth Summit by developing a national strategy to implement Agenda 21 and other Earth Summit agreements through domestic policy and foreign policy.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong support of H-Con Res. 353, expressing the sense of the Congress that the United States should assume a strong leadership role in implementing the decisions made at the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro. I now yield to the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Pelosi, the sponsor, to explain the resolution.
The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the gentleman for yielding. In fact, it is a very simple resolution, which the gentleman has just mostly explained. The Earth Summit Environmental Leadership Act, as this is known, presents us with an opportunity to follow up on the important work of the Earth Summit to develop its blueprint, Agenda 21, for global environmental action. H-Con Res. 353 outlines a comprehensive national strategy for sustainable development in accordance with the principles of Agenda 21. I urge my colleagues to support this resolution. We must make the promise of Rio a reality. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentlewoman's time has expired. The gentleman from...
Who was president in 1992? George Herbert Walker Bush, right? A lot of people want to say that this is a Democrat versus Republican issue. It's not, because both the left and the right have been pushing this agenda fast and behind the scenes, and there have been too many people who have been awake and alert to this, and we need more. You know, Patrick and I have Technocracy News, and while I've done literally thousands of hours on Agenda 21 and gone to their conferences, Patrick kept saying to me, you know what, Debbie, it's not their final game. It's not the end. And it took me a while to figure it out. And I thought, okay, if Agenda 21 is the agenda for the 21st century, right? That's why they called it Agenda 21. What happens in the 22nd century? What happens in the 23rd century? What we're seeing before us is what is called a scientific dictatorship. This is why, when they talk about climate change, what do they say about the science? It's settled. And you know, I do a lot of research, as you all know, and I have lower back pains as a result of all the research I do. And so I needed to go get my back fixed not too long ago, or looked at. And I went to this Bowen therapist. And he asked me what I do, and I told him, you know, I'm a researcher, and he said, oh, that must be why your back's bad, and I drive a lot, and that's why my back's bad. And he said, so what do you do? And I said, well, I talk about this thing called United Nations Agenda 21. Have you ever heard of it? Because everywhere I go, you guys, I'm talking about this stuff. That's what I do. This is my job, although I don't get paid for it. So he says to me, well, I haven't heard of Agenda 21, but I've definitely heard of United Nations. And he says, so I explained to him a little bit about Agenda 21, and he said, oh, well, you know what? It's kind of like the Tower of Babel. And I'm like, huh. By the way, he has Bibles and crosses all over his practice. And he says to me, yeah, it's kind of like the Tower of Babel. And what they did is use technology to try and build a better tower to God, right? For one, right? Because all of us, right? It was about getting to being one to get to God, right? And so he said, if you think about it, people go around all the time bowing their heads to the God of technology. And it dawned on me, what he said and what Patrick was trying to convince me, and I didn't want to let go of those thousands and thousands of hours of research that I did on Agenda 21. And you look at families now at their table. This is what he said also. And you think they're bowing their heads before they eat their meal. And then you see their cell phones. There was another recent conference. It was called the Millikan Institute Global Economic, or I think it was called the Global Conference. And the minimum price, it's coming up in 2017, so start getting your checkbook out, because the minimum price to go to this conference about the future and what's planned is $12,500, and there's only, per person, and there's only a minimum tickets at that price. And then the rest are $15,000 and $25,000. And the people who go to these obviously are very wealthy, and although I pay my way at all these conferences, I don't think I'll be attending that one anytime soon. But it gives you insight into where we're going. My former boss, Eric Schmidt of Google, had a presentation about how smartphones, that's all we'll need in the future. In fact, your smartphone will be able to figure out when you're not feeling well. And if you can't call the hospital, your smartphone will. That is total control of not only our bodies and our minds, but could you imagine that? That is a scientific world, a scientific dictatorship type world that I'm not looking forward to. But they say that this is the future. We've talked about sustainable development, and this is all about saving planet Earth, because they think, as you've heard already, that we human beings are just way too destructive for planet Earth. So let me read from Agenda 21, the Earth Summit Strategy to Save Our Planet, page 6. Effective execution of Agenda 21 will require a profound reorientation of all human society, unlike anything the world has ever experienced. A major shift in the priorities of both governments and individuals, and an unprecedented redeployment of human and financial resources. This shift will demand that a concern for the environmental consequences of every human action. What human action are you doing right now? You're breathing? What else? Listening. Every human action will be integrated into individual and collective decision making at every level. This is from the Bill Clinton's President's Council. It was his Executive Order 12852, the President's Council on Sustainable Development, 2013. This book, called Rescue Mission Planet Earth, is a children's edition of Agenda 21. The front shows Al Gore, Mikhail Gorbachev. It even talks about the rescue mission is our wake-up call. Al Gore sees it as a way of collecting information about the environment. He says, as chairman of the Space Subcommittee in the Senate, I strongly urge the establishment of a mission to planet Earth, a worldwide monitoring system staffed by children designed to rescue the global environment. On the chapter about population, and you heard earlier about Paul Ehrlich and how Paul Ehrlich wrote a couple of books. This one called Ecoscience, Dr. Tim Ball mentioned earlier. But this is what this book, for children says about the population on planet Earth. Now, if you see over here, here's God, and there's a bunch of storks, and God looks so perplexed as all these children are coming. These storks are flying little babies around. And as a children's book, here is a quote. The planet groans every time it registers another birth. Could you imagine being a child and reading this? In another section, it says, aren't men the problem because don't they exploit children? And it says, yes, men don't have to carry the burden of having children. And yeah, they do exploit children. This is the type of propaganda that's out there. Let me go to this book while I have it here. Their future looks like this as a good idea. They propose establishing a money-independent price on every activity that has a clear environmental impact. Doesn't that sound like what I just read from President Clinton's book? The overall level of environmental impact would be regulated by government establishment of what they call a natural resource unit, an NRU. It's like, start thinking cap and trade. So here's how they say the natural resource is an example. Patrick talked about how it would be an accumulation of all the natural resources, and life and the new international economic order or the new monetary system would be based on our natural resources. It might be possible, for instance, for an individual to have a second child or to fly a light aircraft 100 hours per year, but not both. Or one might decide to have an air-conditioned house, but if so, an overseas vacation might be possible only once every 10 years. This book was written by Paul Ehrlich, his wife Ann Ehrlich, and also Obama czar John P. Holdren. These people want to control every aspect of our lives, including our children. This is from the Boy Scouts of America, green2deepgreen.org. They've recently changed their website, but you can see that here is that symbol that we've seen so many times now. That is sustainable development, and right in the middle is where sustainability lives. And you can see that Boy Scouts, by the way, this is a United States website, Boy Scouts has quoted Gru Harlem Brundtland of the United Nations Brundtland Commission. Sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. When a friend alerted me to this website, I called Boy Scouts of America immediately. And I asked to speak to a manager, and I directed him to this page. And when I said, "You are quoting the United Nations, who does not believe in private property rights," he told me to read their website because clearly I'm not reading their website. He hung up on me. I called him back and I said, "Will you please go to this website with me and check this out?" He refused, and then he said, "You need to read our website." And I said, "I did. It sounds like you need to read your website." And he hung up on me, and that was the end of that. But to get a sustainability merit badge, which you can see right here, you can learn about sustainability, and you can get the sustainability merit badge, which I have right here, how you can do it. What it requires a Boy Scout to do is to take an inventory of all the things you buy as a family and start going through and considering what is sustainable and what is not sustainable in the 21st century. That Boy Scout is supposed to go back to the Scoutmaster, have a conversation with the Scoutmaster to figure out how to come back home and say, "Mom and Dad, all these things you are buying are unsustainable." And this is Common Core. This is a third grade reader, and I'll read it to you because you probably haven't been through Common Core yet, so let me help you out. "I won't wear lipstick if it'll make you feel better," Mom called up the stairs. What's wrong with lipstick, guys? What's wrong with lipstick? Why is lipstick bad in the 21st century?
Because they kill whales.
It's two major products, livestock and petroleum. "And I'll only drink a half a cup of coffee," Dad said, but Judy could hardly hear him over the grinding of the rainforest coffee beans. What's wrong with rainforest coffee beans? They have to cut down trees and, plow down trees to, bring in coffee trees. That's what's wrong. Her family sure knew how to ruin a perfectly good Mr. Rubbish mood. She put on her jeans and her what kind of t-shirt? And get this, and to save water, she did not brush her teeth. She clomped downstairs in a mad at your whole family mood. Here's your lunch, said Mom. Mom, it's in a paper bag. What's wrong with the paper bag? Don't you know? You have to cut down a tree to make a paper bag, and paper bags provide shade to help us from global warming. The students are supposed to examine the story and ask who has the most powerful communication, who is more powerful, whose story, who would they back in this, and what the thesis or what the theme is. This is being taught in schools right now. Who said he alone who owns the youth gains the future? It was Hitler. Guys, this is about massive change based on climate change, but really it's all about behavior change. And they want us to curb our appetite. In the final draft of the agreement of the Paris Agreement, the way that we need to maintain the global temperature by 1.5 degrees Celsius as a global citizenry is to live a sustainable lifestyle. So, to back up their claims, they have books like this. This is the United Nations Global Biodiversity Assessment. That map that we've seen so often now, that Wildlands Project map, that is a byproduct of this conference, and you can see it's been a little bit of light reading for me. In section 11.2.3.2, human influences on biodiversity in an agricultural world, a reasonable estimate for an industrialized world society at the present North American material standard of living. Why? Because we eat and consume meat. Is 1 billion people. By the way, the draft document of this, before it was the final published version came out, there were about 6 billion people on Earth at that time, and they said even then that they needed to, about 1 billion people is sustainable for the future. They also said at the time that this was published that they had only studied several million species and they had 18 more million species on planet Earth to study. So can you imagine how big this thing would really be? All the things that are unsustainable in the 21st century: ski runs, grazing of livestock, cows, sheep, goats, horses, fences, paddocks, logging activities, dams, reservoirs, power line construction, private property, land use that serves human needs. The UN conference, and I've dumbed this down, said this about human settlements: land cannot be treated as an ordinary asset controlled by individuals. Private land ownership is also a principal instrument of accumulation and concentration of wealth, and therefore contributes to social injustice. So therefore, social justice can only be achieved if land is used in the interest of society as a whole. This is why we're seeing the shift away from those who own land. We ranchers, we need land. We need land for our cattle to graze. But according to the United Nations, the cattle that we have are causing catastrophic damage to planet Earth, and therefore we need to move away from being meat eaters towards a vegan diet in order to save the world from hunger, fuel, poverty, and the worst impacts of climate change. In fact, Obama was in the Fresno area, and he there was with my governor, Jerry Brown, was there to say we need to reduce our cattle methane 25% by the year 2020. Just recently, California passed a law to say that dairy cows and livestock would be regulated to help curb global warming. Now, what does that do to us producers? How do we survive, guys? But let me tell you this as a cattle rancher. Over 98% of our cow is used for something. This whole room is not only petroleum, but livestock byproduct. You cannot possibly be a vegan in modern day society. It is impossible. Impossible. You may not ingest it, but you consume it. If you are riding or driving your smart car, do you know that those tires have livestock byproduct in them? If you're riding a bicycle, did you know those tires have livestock byproduct? insulation, sheetrock, medical devices, livestock byproduct. And then the rest of the products that we have in the world have a lot of petroleum in them. Everything from baby binkies to nylons to hangers, all the medical devices that you find in hospitals. So why are those things so under attack? Well, if you think about it, those things that provide us with tons and tons of byproducts that you're using right this very second, if they want us to curb our consumerism, wouldn't you, like CO2, start attacking those things that give us so much in life? But this is what they want for us. Unreliable, intermittent energy that does things like that to the environment, to the birds. Do you think this is about saving planet Earth or the environment or the animals?
Also hard hit are.
This is the Western Governor's Crucial Habitat Assessment Tool. All the dark blue is what they consider crucial habitat. They're using this to do planning and zoning. I could tell you my parents' ranch is dark blue. But this is devised by a professor a long time ago. The next video is a 2013, and I am so far behind here, so I'm going to try and jam through. You know what? I won't show you the video. The video is available online. You can look it up. His name is Reed Noss. What he goes on to say in this video is that I created this Wildlands project a while ago. And what was going on a while ago is nobody really wanted to listen to me. The Nature Conservancy, they thought it was kind of a crazy idea. But you know what? Over time, people started adopting this map. He goes on in the end to say, you know what, and even states are now starting to adopt my map and look at California, AB 2785, it's California Essential Habitat Connectivity Project. What it's to do is take land that's already protected and then use a core and corridor system to take more land so that animals can roam freely without the interaction of human beings is the goal. This is my garage. This is the California Essential Habitat Connectivity Project right here. These are 12 binders, and they are thick. This is the California Foothills Legacy Area, over 18 million acres being studied right now from Fresno all the way up to Redding, California, for limited to no human use. This is the breadbasket of the nation. This is the Northern Sierra Nevada Foothills Wildlife Connectivity Project for frogs, over 2 million acres in the Sierra Nevadas. And then we have stories like this, like Andy Johnson out of Wyoming, who put in this stock pond, and the EPA came around and said, you know what, because you're violating the Clean Water Act, even though Wyoming gave him a permit, we're going to charge you $37,500 per day until you put this plan back the way you found it. By the end, when Andy Johnson finally got some help from Pacific Legal Foundation, it would have been over $16 million that the Johnson family owed to the federal government. There's stories like Drake's Bay oyster. How many have heard about Drake's Bay oyster? These are my friends, the Lunny family. And Drake's Bay Oyster Farm is closed down. It's shut down. They're also cattle ranchers, but they provided California with over 30% of sustainable oysters, clean, great food, great protein. But because the National Park Service doesn't want them on the coast anymore, they said that they were harming the harbor seals and therefore needed to shut them down. Over 308,000 photos were taken in secret of the Lunny family and their operation, and not one showed that they were harming the harbor seals. In fact, what was disturbing the harbor seals was a kayaker, and the seals just simply went underwater when the kayaker went by. But the Department of Interior shut them down anyway. These stories are going on all around the United States of America and rural America. Things like Yosemite, where for river restoration, they're going to shut down the historic Curry Village ice skating rink, the bike stands, the raft stands. Why? For river restoration, what does that have to do with river restoration? It has nothing to do with river restoration. It has everything to do with getting human beings out of what they call biologically sensitive areas. Something that is at the heart of my family's struggle right now is the Klamath River dams. This is the largest dam removal project in worldwide history. There are over 4 dams on this river system. The National Geographic calls the Klamath River dams a reverse system. It's an upside-down system because most rivers start in cold mountains and the water is fresh and cold and the fish love that, like trout. They love it. But not in this river system. It starts in low, shallow, warm lakes. Up in that area is very phosphorus rich. It's volcanic. The water quality is not good. Not in the beginning of the river. But as you get closer and closer to the ocean where the mountains get really high, the water gets colder and cleaner. The topography of this river system makes it impossible, and always has, for fish to migrate all the way upstream or all the way upriver. So what the Department of Interior is doing right now is working very fast to come up with this dam removal project by the year 2020 to start breaching the dams. We, as taxpayers, cannot afford to pay for this dam removal of billions of dollars, so what they want to do is breach the dams. 187 miles up the Klamath River is the first dam, the largest dam. It's a hydroelectric, clean, green, renewable energy dam that provides flood control, drought control, irrigation, recreation, all these benefits that we get from this dam. But what the federal government wants to do, and the tribes that are going to get millions of dollars and thousands of acres under what they call river restoration, what they want to do is breach those dams and allow over 20 million cubic yards of sediment, pollutants, to sludge its way down the river. And the government gives itself a pass to kill anything along its way as the sludge makes its way down at least 187 miles out to sea over the next 60 years. This is not about scientific integrity. This is not about allowing the coho salmon to swim upstream, because when that sludge starts coming down, do you think that those salmon are going to have much of a chance of survival? Probably not. These are the things that are happening in rural America, and it should be of no surprise. Obama said, no challenge poses a greater threat to future generations than climate change. And that's why over the past 6 years, we've done more to combat climate change, from the way we produce energy to the way we use it. That's why we've set aside, this administration has set aside more public lands and waters than any other administration in history. He is determined to make sure that the American leadership leads international action. If you're part of CalSTRS or CalPERS, you're part of this problem too. Well, CalSTRS and CalPERS, they've signed onto the United Nations Principles for Responsible Investing to divest from fossil fuel and livestock portfolios. And what we have right now is all of this, which is the 2030 agenda. Alex mentioned that that all learners acquire the knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development. Eliminate all forms of violence against all women and girls in the public and private spheres. That sounds great, but how do you do that in the private sphere? By the year 2020, and this is where the Klamath River dams come in, protect and restore water-related ecosystems, including mountains, forests, wetlands, rivers, aquifers, lakes, with no one left behind, as Obama said. I'll end it here because I think this is something we can all do right now. Let each citizen remember at the moment he offers his vote that he is executing one of the most solemn trusts in human society, for which he is accountable to God and his country. We may have elections every 2, 4, or 6 years, but every day we can vote with our dollar. Yes? Walmart is all a part of sustainable development. In fact, with the Business 2030 agenda, and they state the United Nations in the agenda, Walmart's goal is to start nudging us from consumerism and start thinking about what you should and should not be buying based on a sustainable score. So they're going to start looking at the environmental impact. They're already doing this, and they're working with factories right now in Mexico to start doing this. So I declare that we should start voting with our dollar every single day. Do you see the arrow? You can never unsee that arrow. Our destruction, should it come at all, will be from another quarter. Daniel Webster said, "From the inattention of the people to the concerns of their government, from their carelessness and negligence, I must confess I do apprehend some danger. I fear that they may place too implicit a confidence in their public servants." Have we not been doing that? And fail properly to scrutinize their conduct. I'll add in not just our public servants, but the staff members too of those public servants. That in this way we may be made the dupes of designing men. Are we Americans or Americants? Will you leave here today and go stand, or will you go find a place to sit and watch how this is going to end? Our responsibility is to educate, communicate, but do not. What don't you want to do? Hibernate. Thank you.